The day I found out my son had secretly gotten married because I wasn't special enough was the day I decided to show them what a rejected mother can do. "What time is your wedding?" I asked my son. Michael. On an ordinary Thursday afternoon, while I was putting away the grocery bags I'd bought for them. That's when Jessica, sitting out in the living room, yelled the answer that shattered me. "We already got married yesterday. Ms. Alice. It was only for special people. My name is Alice Johnson. 67 years old." In that moment, standing frozen in their kitchen, with the bags still in my arms, I felt my whole world collapse. My son had gotten married the day before, and I had no idea. To understand how humiliating that was, you need to know who I am and what I had meant in their lives. I was the mother who covered everything, literally everything. The rent of $800. The building fees. Electricity. Water. Internet. Groceries. Even the little luxuries they felt entitled to. It all started 3 years ago, when Michael met Jessica at a company party where he worked as an accountant. Jessica was a sales associate at an expensive boutique in the mall. Always dressed to the nines. Always bragging about important people she knew. Always implying she deserved a more luxurious life. Michael fell head over heels. He started spending money he didn't have to impress her fancy restaurants. Designer gifts. Weekend trips. I saw my son sinking into debt and worried. But he kept insisting everything was under control. Michael's father left us when I was 7 months pregnant. He said he wasn't ready to be a dad and disappeared. Since then, it was just the two of us. I worked any job I could find: house cleaning, retail, elder care, anything to raise my son with dignity. Michael was always my pride, smart, affectionate, the kind of son any mother dreams of. When they decided to move in together 2 years ago, my heart filled with joy. Finally, Michael was going to start a family of his own. When he asked me to help with the initial expenses, I didn't hesitate. He's my only child, and family is supposed to help each other. "Mom, we found a perfect apartment, but the rent is a bit heavy at first," Michael said that day. "You could help just for the first few months, until we get settled." Jessica chimed in with a smile I didn't yet recognize as fake. "We'll be independent soon. Really soon." That soon became the refrain, haunting me for the next 2 years. The apartment was in an upscale neighborhood, with a gym, a pool, and a barbecue area. The rent took more than half of my modest pension, but I paid it gladly, thinking it was only temporary, month after month. Though temporary turned permanent. First, it was just the rent. Then the electric bill. It's high because of the air conditioner. Ms. Alice. Just this once. Then water. Building fees. Groceries. Each request came with a new excuse, and the promise that this will be the last time. Before long, I was funding their entire life. Yet they still ate at fancy restaurants, took weekend trips, and Jessica always had salon hair and perfectly done nails. When I asked Michael about these expenses, he said they were networking investments that would soon turn into better opportunities at work. Then last year, Jessica quit her job, saying she wanted to take an advanced aesthetics course that cost $3,000. "It's an investment in the future, Ms. Alice," she said. A future, as I realized today, that didn't include me. Michael even bought a new car on financing, using the money left over because I was covering all their costs. They lived like the wealthy on my dime, while I believed I was helping my son build a home. The bitterest part was that I wasn't even welcome in the apartment I was paying for. Jessica always had a reason to keep me away. "Today's not a good day, we have guests." Or, "The place is a mess, better come another time." When I did manage to step inside, I felt like I was in the way. Jessica spoke to me like I was the help, Ms. Alice. "Did you bring the dish soap I asked for?" "Oh, And don't forget the building fees are due tomorrow. Michael, my own son, started treating me like an obligation. He didn't visit anymore. Didn't call to see how I was. He only showed up when he needed money for something extra. And I swallowed it all in silence. Thinking that was love. Thinking I was being a good mother. A considerate mother-in-law. How foolish I was that Thursday. When I innocently asked about the time of the wedding. Genuinely wanting to share my son's joy. In recent months, they had vaguely mentioned making it official. And I'd been eager to witness that special moment in my son's life. But Jessica's answer hit me like a punch to the chest. We already got married yesterday. Ms. Alice. It was only for special people. Special people. I, the one paying for their entire lifestyle, wasn't special. I, the single mother who raised Michael, wasn't special enough to be at my own son's wedding. Who was there? I asked. My voice trembling. Oh. My parents. My siblings. A few cousins. Close friends from work. Jessica replied with chilling nonchalance. As if excluding the groom's mother were the most normal thing in the world. Michael walked in then and sensed the tension. When he saw my stunned face, he lowered his eyes. He knew he'd done something unforgivable. Why didn't I know? I asked him directly. Mom. It was just something simple and quick. We didn't want to bother you. Bother me. Being present at my only son's wedding would have bothered them, but paying every month bothered no one. I walked out of their place in total shock. Unable to say another word. When I got home, I fell apart and cried. I cried harder than I had in years, cried for the humiliation, for my gratitude trampled, for the blindness of turning myself into an ATM. For 3 days I lay in bed, replaying every moment of the past 2 years, every bill I paid, every sacrifice I made, every time I set aside my own needs to give them money. And what I got in return was the greatest humiliation of my life. That Sunday, I made the most important decision of my 67 years. Monday morning, I went to the bank and canceled all automatic transfers, the rent, the building fees, every single expense. Everything stopped. A week went by. A week of complete silence from them. Not a single call to ask if I was okay after the shock I'd been through. Nothing. Until Monday morning. 1 week after I discovered the truth. My phone rang. It was Jessica. Her voice panicked. Ms. Alice. The rent is late. Did you forget to pay? And for the first time in 2 years. I answered with the calm of someone who had finally found her dignity again. Didn't I already tell you I stopped paying? The silence on the other end was deafening. Then, that thin, shaky voice came back. Why did you stop paying? You're joking. Right, no. Jessica. I'm not joking. You have 30 days to take over all the expenses. Because I'm not paying another cent. I heard her scream for Michael. Seconds later. He was on the line, Mom. What is this, Michael? My son. I said with a composure that surprised even me. People who are special handle things themselves. You don't need help from someone who wasn't special enough to be at her own son's wedding. Then I hung up. For the first time in 2 years. I hung up on them. And do you know how I felt? Relieved. A relief beyond words. As if I'd just shrugged off 100 pounds from my back. In that moment, looking out the living room window, I knew that panicked call was only the opening act of what was coming. Because this rejected mother still had a lot to teach them about consequences, and they had no idea what storm was ahead. After hanging up on Monday, I thought I'd have a few quiet days to put everything together. But I was completely wrong. From that moment on, my life turned into hell with calls, messages, and emotional blackmail I never imagined my own son could do. Tuesday morning, 7 a.m. The phone rang again. It was Michael. With that whiny, lost little boy voice he'd used since childhood whenever he wanted something. He said we needed to talk, that I couldn't just stop helping them like that, as if I were a guaranteed stipend, a social benefit they were entitled to forever. When I asked what they had done over the past 2 years to become independent, the silence on the other end was heavy, because he knew very well what they had done. They spent on luxuries, trips, and frivolities, while I cut back on everything to bankroll their upper-crust lifestyle. Michael even tried to blame me, saying Jessica was so stressed she hadn't slept all night. I replied that I'd slept very well, a blatant lie. The truth is, I'd tossed and turned all night, asking myself if I was doing the right thing. But hearing my son try to shift the responsibility onto me, I knew for sure I was on the right path. What shocked me most was when he asked, "Do you want to destroy our marriage, destroy their marriage?" I was the one forced to learn about their wedding through humiliation. I, who wasn't even invited to the ceremony. I answered that if anything had been destroyed, I wasn't the one who did it, and I didn't recall receiving any apology from them. Another awkward silence followed. Indeed, they had never apologized, never even bothered to justify the humiliation they put me through. 5 minutes later, it was Jessica again, pleading that I needed to understand their situation, that they couldn't possibly pay everything at once. She said I had promised to help, as if I'd signed a lifetime support contract. When I lost patience and asked why I couldn't stop paying bills that weren't mine, she had the nerve to say I was overreacting. Overreacting. Being shut out of my own son's wedding is overreacting. That entire week was a nightmare. Calls morning, noon, and night. Endless iMessage texts trying to convince me. Michael even sent voice messages, crying, saying I was being cruel to them. They even offered a deal they'd pay half the bills, and I'd pay the other half as a transition. As if my help were a business contract to renegotiate. By Thursday, Jessica had the gall to show up at my house. When I opened the door and saw her staged look of suffering, I almost slammed it in her face. But I let her in, curious to see how far her brazenness would go. She started with a poorly told story about a last-minute wedding, her parents pressuring them. Then an opening at the courthouse, lies stacked on lies. She spoke like she'd memorized a script. But it was obvious she was making up excuses on the spot. The most ridiculous excuse was when she said they didn't include me because they thought I'd be upset by the simplicity. Because I always wanted Michael to have a big wedding. A shameless lie. I never said that in my life. On the contrary, I've always criticized extravagant weddings. When she realized I wasn't buying any of it, Jessica changed tactics instantly. The tears dried up, and the real person I'd always sensed beneath her appeared. She started talking about commitments and the life they'd built, as if I had an obligation to fund their grand ambitions. Then she said something that chilled my blood, that I was going to ruin their marriage over a trivial thing. A trivial thing. She called my humiliation a trivial thing. I answered that if their marriage would collapse just because my generosity ended, then it wasn't a very solid marriage to begin with. And that's when she showed who she really was. Her face went red with anger. She headed for the door. But before leaving, she turned and threatened me, said I'd regret this. That I wouldn't have any family left if I kept being childish. Childish. In her view, defending my dignity was childish. I replied, if my family only exists when I'm paying the bills, then I never had a family. She left, slamming the door. And I stood there realizing I had just seen the true character of the woman my son had chosen over his mother. Over the weekend, the pressure grew even worse. Michael showed up Saturday morning, unannounced. Looking so desperate he almost made me soften. He said they were about to be evicted, that the landlord didn't want to talk anymore. When I asked how they couldn't cover the rent of $800 when both of them worked, he lowered his head and admitted something that left me stunned. They were $8,000 in credit card debt. $8,000. While I was covering all their basic expenses, They had pushed themselves into 8,000 in debt buying frivolities. They used the money I provided to feel free, then blew all their own income on nonsense. I confronted Michael about it, and he slipped into that slick tone, saying everyone who just got married ends up in debt. I answered that anyone with a little sense knows how to balance things and never spends more than they earn. That was when I realized the situation was even worse than I'd thought. They weren't just irresponsible, they were living recklessly, and they wanted me to keep bankrolling that recklessness forever. Michael tried to tug at my heart, saying I couldn't abandon my own son. I replied that I wasn't abandoning anyone, I was simply done supporting two adults who needed to learn to stand on their own 2 feet. When I said that if they lost the apartment, they could move back in with Jessica's parents, the special ones, I saw Michael's face change completely. I realized moving in with the in-laws wasn't an option they wanted. Funny, isn't it? Jessica's special parents weren't so special when it came to giving the couple a place to stay. He left with his head down, and I stood there wondering how everything had come to this. For a moment, I asked myself if I was being too harsh. Should a real mother forgive? But then I remembered the words that broke me, only for special people, and all doubt vanished. That week, I noticed something that stunned me. The neighbors started looking at me differently. Mrs. Carter, who lives next door, greeted me at the gate and said she was proud of me. She said she had always seen Michael and Jessica taking advantage of my kindness, but had never dared to say anything. Other neighbors started talking, too. I found out the whole neighborhood knew I was footing their bills, and many were upset seeing the two of them drive a new car to go on trips while I walked to save every dollar. That realization showed me how naive I had been. I wasn't just being financially exploited, I was being publicly humiliated without even knowing it. The whole neighborhood knew I was the foolish mother supporting a grown son. The next Monday, exactly 2 weeks after my ultimatum, I got a call I'd been waiting for. It was Marlene, Jessica's mother. The same Marlene who attended the select wedding that left me out. The same one who was always frosty the few times we crossed paths. Her voice carried the authority of someone used to fixing other people's problems and expecting obedience. She said we needed to talk, and that she could come to my house that very afternoon to clear a few things up. The way she spoke, as if I were obligated to receive her, as if she had some kind of claim over my life, irritated me to the bone. But I agreed to meet. I wanted to see with my own eyes what kind of person thought excluding the groom's mother from her daughter's wedding was normal. And that's when I understood the war was only beginning. And I hadn't yet seen what this family was capable of. Marlene arrived at exactly 3 p.m. driving a silver BMW, as if to flaunt why she believed she had the right to give orders. She stepped out of the car with that familiar arrogance, dressed like she was headed to an important business meeting, not to visit her daughter's mother-in-law. During the 2 years Michael and Jessica lived together, Marlene always treated me as an outsider in her daughter's life. On the rare occasions we met at birthdays or family events, she spoke to me with forced politeness that barely hid her contempt. It was obvious she considered Michael a good match for Jessica, while I was just the dead weight that came with the package. When I opened the door, she walked in without waiting for an invitation, letting her eyes sweep around my living room like someone appraising property. She sat on my sofa as if it were her own house and set her designer bag on the floor with a deliberately dramatic gesture. She opened exactly as I expected. We needed to resolve this like civilized adults. Jessica was falling apart because of my change in attitude. Michael was stressed at work because of the pressure I was causing at home. I sat in silence, watching how she turned my decision to stop being exploited into the source of everyone else's suffering. According to Marlene, I was selfish and unreasonable. Family helps each other in hard times. I couldn't abandon my son when he needed me most. When she finished her memorized speech, I asked point blank, did she know I hadn't been invited to her daughter's wedding? Marlene's expression changed immediately. The condescending tone vanished, replaced by something colder, more calculating. She said the wedding had been the kids' decision. that she didn't interfere in Jessica's choices. But when I pressed, asking whether she thought it was right to exclude the groom's mother, she showed her true colors. She said every family has its own way of operating, and perhaps it would be best for everyone if I accepted my new role in Michael's life. A new role, as if being ignored and humiliated were some kind of promotion. That was when Marlene revealed the real reason for her visit. She said she had a proposal to settle things once and for all. She and her husband were willing to buy Michael and Jessica a small house. But in exchange, I needed to transfer to them the entire amount I'd spent over the past 2 years as an investment in the new property. The brazenness was unbelievable. They wanted me to pay for the very years I'd been exploited, so they could play the heroic parents rescuing their children. In her fancy wording, it would be a way for me to contribute to the family's future without creating financial dependency. I replied that I had zero interest in continuing to fund people who treated me like garbage. Marlene sighed, as if dealing with a stubborn child. Then delivered the first threat. Michael and Jessica were considering moving to another state, where her family had better job opportunities. I could lose contact with my son completely if I didn't cooperate to resolve their financial crisis. The blackmail was obvious: pay up or lose your child. But Marlene didn't know I'd lost my son a long time ago. Michael, who now used emotion to extort me, was no longer the boy I had raised. I told her plainly, if Michael wants to move, that's his business. I will no longer make decisions based on fear of abandonment. Because the abandonment happened long before this conversation. Marlene showed clear irritation at my answer. She said I was making a mistake that would cost me dearly. That family is sacred, and that I would regret choosing self-respect over love. I replied that it wasn't self-respect, it was dignity. And if their love depended on my money, then it was never love at all. As the conversation grew tense, Marlene switched tactics. She brought up my age, saying older people often get confused about money, that she knew many cases of seniors being exploited by bad actors. She was subtly implying I was senile, laying the groundwork to question my mental capacity. She said perhaps I needed professional help to make important decisions, that there are legal measures to protect someone in a vulnerable position. That's when I understood her visit wasn't a negotiation, it was a probe. She was testing my mental state, looking for signs of confusion or instability to use against me later. I rose from the armchair and said the conversation was over. Marlene also stood but made no move to leave. Instead, she walked around my living room, studying the photos and objects as if she were inventorying assets. She asked about my plans for the house, whether I had an updated will, whether anyone helped manage my finances. Each question was an intrusion dressed up as concern. It was obvious she was assessing my assets and my ability to protect them. When I again asked her to leave, Marlene looked at me with the same coldness I'd seen on Jessica's face. She said I was choosing a very dangerous path. That lonely, stubborn people often end up in difficult situations. It was an indirect but very clear threat. If I didn't cooperate, they would find another way to get what they wanted. I walked Marlene to the door. Before leaving, she turned back to deliver a final warning. She said Michael and Jessica had legal rights as family, that there were ways to protect an elder from impulsive decisions, and I should think carefully before continuing to be hard-headed. When the door closed, I stood in the living room for several minutes, processing what had just happened. This was not a worried mother-in-law's visit, it was an investigation, an assessment, preparation for a legal move. I immediately called Mrs. Carter, my neighbor, and told her everything. She was outraged, saying Jessica's family had shown their true colors. People like that don't stop until they get what they want. And I needed to protect myself. That afternoon, I went to see a lawyer. I could no longer face this situation alone. I needed legal advice on my rights and how to defend against the next attacks. Attorney Henry Allen, who has an office downtown and is well known in family law, listened carefully and gave a very candid assessment. He said what I was experiencing was a classic case of elder financial abuse. That Marlene's visit was clearly an attempt at intimidation, and I needed protective measures immediately. First recommendation: change all banking and investment passwords. Second, draw up a new, detailed will, explicitly affirming my mental state and my decisions. Third, document every interaction with Michael, Jessica, and their family. Henry also suggested I install security cameras at home and consider granting him a limited power of attorney for legal matters, to prevent anyone from pressuring me to sign documents in the future. When I left his office, I had a clear protection plan and a deeper understanding of how serious this was. This wasn't just a family dispute about money, it was an organized attempt to seize control of my life and assets. In the days that followed, I carried out every measure Henry recommended: changed passwords, installed cameras, drafted a new will. Each step gave me more confidence, more sense of control over my life. That week, Michael called me several times, but I didn't pick up. He also came by twice, thanks to the cameras. I could see who it was without opening the door. I wasn't ready for more confrontation until I knew I was fully protected. Mrs. Carter told me Michael and Jessica had been circling the neighborhood, asking neighbors about me, whether I was acting strangely, receiving suspicious visitors, seeming forgetful or ill. They were building a file to question my competence, collecting testimony to attack my decision-making capacity. That discovery left me both furious and more determined. They really thought they could have me declared incompetent to seize my assets. But if they wanted a war, I was ready. That Friday morning, Jessica showed up at my door. This time, she wasn't alone. With her was an older woman who introduced herself as a social worker. They said they were conducting a wellness visit, that they'd received reports I was isolated and possibly neglecting my health. The social worker wanted to come in to assess my living conditions. Through the glass door, I said I wouldn't receive visitors without an appointment, and any official evaluation would have to be done with Attorney Henry present. The social worker insisted it was just an informal conversation, that they were worried about me. I replied that if they were truly worried, they would have thought of that before excluding me from the wedding and trying to extort me. I said all future communication had to go through Attorney Henry. Jessica tried to play on my emotions, saying she loved me like a mother and just wanted to make sure I was okay. But her voice sounded fake and forced. It was clearly just another act meant to manipulate me. When they finally left, I called Attorney Henry Allen right away and told him about the visit. He said I'd done exactly the right thing, that any assessment without a court order and without legal representation was invalid. But he also warned that they would very likely escalate the situation. The next attack would be more serious and could involve authorities or legal proceedings. That night, alone in a house now protected by new cameras, I looked out the window and realized my life had changed completely. 2 months earlier, I was just a devoted mother, proud to be helping my son. Now, I was a woman fighting to keep her freedom from her own family. But for the first time in a long while, I didn't see myself as a victim. I saw myself as a warrior, a 67-year-old warrior who had found her strength again and would never let anyone take it away. The phone rang late that night. It was an unknown number. But the moment I picked up, I recognized the voice. Michael was calling from who knows where. His voice was different, panicked, shaky. He said we needed to talk urgently, that things were out of control, that he didn't want this turning into a legal war. I replied that he had chosen that path when he treated me like an obstacle instead of his mother. He was the one who pushed everything toward court by sending a lawyer and a social worker to intimidate me. Michael said he never wanted to hurt me, that it was all a misunderstanding, that everything would be fine if I behaved again. Behave, it always came back to those two words. To them, behave meant accept being exploited, keep paying to feed their ingratitude. Buy a love that never existed. I told Michael that if he truly wanted to talk, he could set a meeting at attorney Henry Allen's office, with witnesses present. Because I would never again accept private meetings full of manipulation or emotional blackmail. He hung up without answering, and I knew any chance of a peaceful reconciliation had ended. The war, Michael started, officially knocked on my door on a Tuesday morning. Delivered by a court officer carrying the papers that changed everything. It was a petition asking the court to declare me incapacitated and to appoint Michael Johnson as my legal guardianship. Reading those documents, I felt a tidal wave of outrage and grief, unlike anything I had ever experienced. My son, the child I raised alone, taught with all my love and sacrifice, was now trying to strip me of my legal personhood to seize my money. Attorney Henry Allen arrived in less than an hour after I called. As he reviewed the file, his face darkened. He said the petition was very well prepared, that they had hired strong attorneys. And this was more serious than we'd thought. Their strategy was insidious, claim I had cognitive decline, showed signs of paranoia, and was being manipulated by bad actors. They offered evidence that I had cut off financial support, installed security cameras, and refused medical help. Every sensible step I had taken to protect myself was being twisted into a symptom of mental illness. My financial independence was labeled irresponsibility. My self-defense was branded paranoia. My dignity was distorted into cognitive decline. Henry explained we had 30 days to respond to the petition and that the process could last months. He said we needed complete medical records, witnesses to attest to my competence, and proof of the real motive behind the lawsuit. First step, a full battery of medical tests. Dr. Robert Campbell, a renowned neurologist, conducted cognitive exams, an MRI, blood work, and a psychiatric evaluation. 3 intense days of testing confirmed what I had always known: I was fully lucid and healthy. While we waited for results, Henry began gathering evidence of the financial abuse I'd suffered. He requested bank statements for the last 3 years, transfer receipts, documentation of every dollar I had given Michael and Jessica. When the numbers were laid out in spreadsheets, even I was stunned. A total of $43,000 over 3 years, $43,000 taken from my pension and savings to fund the luxury lifestyle of 2 people who treated me like trash. But the number was only the beginning. Henry hired a private investigator to check Michael and Jessica's true financial situation. What we found was even more shocking than I expected. Michael's accountant's salary was very high, nearly triple my pension. Jessica, before she quit, also had a substantial income. Together, they earned more than enough to live comfortably, pay their own rent, and still have money left over. The investigator also discovered they had more than $15,000 in credit card debt. They used my money for essentials while blowing their paychecks on luxuries, travel, and frivolities, driving themselves into debt. Worse, we found evidence Michael had lied to me about multiple financial emergencies, car repairs that never happened, Jessica's fabricated health issues, bogus work expenses, all to squeeze extra money beyond what I was already paying each month. It was a systematic scam. An exploitation scheme that lasted 3 years and only stopped when I discovered the truth about the wedding. Henry organized everything into a thick dossier, proof of emotional manipulation, evidence of deliberate lies, documentation of financial abuse, and now an attempted fraud to have me declared incapacitated. The case against Michael and Jessica was solid, but they didn't sit still either. Over the next 2 weeks, a parade of strangers showed up at my door, fishing for information. Neighbors I barely knew asked about my health. Clerks at stores where I shopped made sly comments about my behavior. Even my former doctor received calls probing my medical history. Michael and Jessica were building a file out of rumors, half-truths, and statements from people who barely knew me. They wanted to create the impression that the whole neighborhood was worried about my sanity. Fortunately, That strategy backfired. Mrs. Carter and the close neighbors were outraged by the invasive questions and started telling me about the manipulation attempts. That gave us even more evidence that their family was orchestrating a smear campaign. During this period, I met other women who had gone through similar situations. Attorney Henry Allen connected me with a support group for victims of financial abuse within the family. And the stories I heard made me realize I was not alone. Mrs. Rose, 72, had spent 2 years fighting her children, who wanted to sell her house and split the money. Mrs. Carmen, 69, had been sued by her own grandson, who claimed she was being manipulated by a new boyfriend. They all shared the same story, being treated by their own families as a source of money rather than as human beings. Their support became a precious emotional lifeline. They helped me understand that what was happening didn't reflect my worth as a mother or a person, it reflected the character of those attacking me. 3 weeks after the petition was filed, we received the date for the preliminary hearing. It would take place within a month, the moment when the judge would decide whether there was enough evidence to proceed with the incapacity case. Attorney Henry prepared me thoroughly. We reviewed every detail of the story, organized our defense strategy, and drafted likely questions. He taught me to stay calm, answer clearly, and absolutely not react to provocations that would surely come. The week before the hearing, Michael played his final card to force me to quit. He came to my house with an unfamiliar pastor, saying he wanted to reconcile through faith. The pastor spoke about forgiveness, honoring parents, and how God does not support family division. Michael cried, apologized, and said he only wanted to protect me and everything would go back to normal if I would just trust him. For a moment, the mother in me almost softened. But then I remembered the petition. I remembered the lies, the manipulation, the plan to have me declared incompetent. I remembered that if he were truly remorseful, he would have withdrawn the petition before speaking of forgiveness. I told the pastor that I respected his faith. But God also teaches justice and the protection of the innocent from abusers. I told Michael that if he wanted my forgiveness, he could start by withdrawing the petition and repaying the money he had obtained through deceit. Michael stopped crying immediately and reverted to the cold person I knew too well. He said I was making a mistake that would cost me dearly, that he had enough evidence to prove I lacked mental capacity, and that I would lose everything. The mask fell again, the remorse was fake. The tears were theater. And the pastor was merely a tool of manipulation. They wanted me to give up voluntarily, so they wouldn't have to face a trial where the truth would be exposed. That night, the night before the hearing, I stayed up very late, reviewing every document, every piece of evidence, every argument. More than that, I reviewed my entire life. I thought about the woman I was 3 months earlier, afraid, manipulated, convinced she had to buy love. I thought about the woman I had become, strong, independent, fighting for her dignity. The transformation was painful, but it was also liberating. Whatever the outcome of the hearing, I had already won the most important battle, the battle against submission within myself. I had reclaimed my self-worth and learned that I deserved respect. When I finally fell asleep, I slept with the peace of someone who knows she made the right choice, even when it was the hardest one. The next morning, the day of the hearing, dawned crystal cold. I wore my best navy suit, the very one I had bought years ago to attend Michael's college graduation. The irony wasn't lost on me. I wore the outfit I once used to celebrate my son to a hearing where he was trying to destroy me. Attorney Henry picked me up, and on the way to the courthouse, he gave his final instructions. Judge Carlos Mendoza is known for being meticulous and fair, not swayed by emotion, and always evidence-based. When we arrived, I saw Michael and Jessica with their attorney. Jessica wore black, as if attending a funeral, perhaps the funeral of our family ties. Michael avoided my eyes, but I could see he was nervous. his hands constantly fidgeting. Marlene was there too, seated behind them like a matriarch, overseeing the takedown of the opposing family. When our eyes met, she gave me that same cold look I knew too well. The hearing began with Michael's attorney presenting. He spoke about my advanced age, about worrying behavioral changes, about irrational financial decisions, and produced neighbor statements claiming they had seen me behaving oddly. When it was our turn, Attorney Henry was a razor's edge. He submitted medical results proving my perfect lucidity, presented evidence of systematic financial abuse, and exposed the lies and tactics Michael had used to squeeze money from me. The decisive moment came when Henry played the security camera footage showing Michael and Jessica lurking around my home, observing my daily routine, clearly planning their next moves. He also presented evidence that they had tried to bribe neighbors to give false testimony against me. The judge listened to everything, asked thoughtful questions of both sides, and then retired to deliberate. The 2 hours of waiting felt like a lifetime. When Judge Mendoza returned, his decision was clear and firm. There was no evidence whatsoever that I lacked mental capacity. The medical evaluations confirmed I was fully lucid, and all the evidence pointed to a scheme to exploit an elder through the legal system. The judge not only dismissed the petition to declare me incapacitated, but also ordered Michael and Jessica to pay all court costs and opened an investigation into potential procedural fraud. As I left the courthouse, I felt indescribable relief, but also a deep sadness. I had won the legal battle, yet I knew I had lost my son forever. Michael, the one who tried to strip me of my freedom, was no longer the boy I had raised with all my love. That afternoon, back in the safety of my home, I called attorney Henry Allen to ask about next steps. I wanted to sue Michael and Jessica for emotional damages and to recover the money they had conned out of me. But he urged me to think carefully. I had already won the most important battle. My freedom and dignity were protected, and perhaps it was time to move forward instead of prolonging the conflict. All night, I thought about his words. Did I really want to spend the rest of my years in court? Facing my own son would getting even bring me peace. In the end, I decided Henry was right. I had reclaimed my freedom and my dignity. I learned to know my own worth and to refuse abuse. I found my strength and my voice. Now it was time to use that energy to build a better life, not to destroy the people who had hurt me. The war was over, and I had won the most important fight, the fight for myself. 6 months have passed since that day in court. Today, as I tell this story, I'm sitting on the balcony of my new apartment, taking in a view I never dared to dream of at 67. Watching the sun set over downtown Denver, I finally understand what it means to live for myself. 3 weeks after the hearing, I made one of the most important decisions of my life. I sold the house where I had raised Michael, where I had spent years nurturing hopes of a reunited family that never really existed. With the proceeds, I bought this 10th floor apartment downtown, with a panoramic view that reminds me every day the world is much bigger than family troubles. The change wasn't just in space, but in feeling. Every piece of furniture I chose, every painting I hung, every plant I set on the balcony, each was my decision, based on my taste and my joy. For the first time in decades, my home reflected who I truly am, not what others expected me to be. Mrs. Creed Carter helped me move. When she saw the finished apartment, she said something I'll never forget, that I looked 10 years younger. And there was a light in my eyes she hadn't seen in a long time. She was right. I had regained not only financial freedom but also my identity. With the money left, after paying off debts and investing for the future, I decided to do the things I had long dreamed of but never done, because for years I was always handing money to Michael and Jessica. First on the list, travel not to fancy places, but to places that meant something to me. I flew to Chicago to visit a cousin I hadn't seen in 15 years. I stayed at her place for a week, talking late into the night, reliving our youth, reconnecting with my past in a way I'd forgotten. After that, I went to Myrtle Beach to see the ocean for the first time in my life. It might sound odd at 67, but throughout my adult life, there were always other priorities. Always someone who needed my money more than a trip. I spent 5 days in a small seaside inn, waking early to watch the sunrise over the Atlantic, walking barefoot on the sand, chatting with other travelers my age who were also discovering the freedom of later life. It was one of the happiest weeks of my life. When I returned, I began exploring activities I'd always loved but never had time to pursue. I enrolled in a beginner watercolor class through the community college's lifelong learning program. I discovered I had a knack for watercolor and found immense peace blending colors on white paper. I also started volunteering at a neighborhood childcare center. 2 mornings a week. I help care for children whose mothers work and have nowhere else to leave them. Their open, warm hugs, asking nothing in return, remind me every day what real love is. Through volunteering, I met women who became true friends, people who enjoy my company, value my life, experience, and come to share, not to ask for money. Our every other week dinners and conversations have become some of the most precious moments of my week. Helen, 71, freed herself from manipulative adult children a decade ago, and now travels across the United States to places she always dreamed of. Connie, 65, opened a small bakery once her grandkids grew up and discovered a talent for artistic cakes. Rita, 69, returned to campus to study psychology because she always wanted a deeper understanding of human behavior. We share the same story, once seen by our families as sources of money, not as people. But after 60, we found our strength. We're living the best versions of ourselves. A year after the hearing, I received an unexpected call. It was Michael. His voice sounded different, more mature, more tired. He said he wanted to see me and had something important to share. We met at a neutral coffee shop downtown. When I saw him walk in, I realized he had changed too thinner. Older. The responsibilities of adult life had finally shown up. Michael formally apologized for what he had done. He said financial pressure and the influence of Jessica and her family had led him to choices he now deeply regretted. He admitted the marriage was in crisis. Jessica had shown her true colors when the money ran out. He was starting to understand the kind of person he had married. I listened in silence, watching my son try to explain, to justify 3 years of lies and manipulation. When he finished, I said I appreciated the apology, but some wounds are too deep to be healed by a few words. Michael asked whether there was any chance to mend the relationship between mother and son. I answered that I was willing to get to know the person he was becoming, but I had no interest in going back to being the mother he once exploited and disrespected. I said that if he wanted a relationship with me, it had to be built on mutual respect, on visits that didn't come with requests for money, on conversations that showed real interest in my life. I would no longer bankroll anyone, no longer accept being looked down on, no longer confuse love with financial obligation. Michael accepted my conditions, and slowly, we began to build a new relationship. He visits me every 2 weeks, always gives a heads up, always respects my space. We talk about work, about life, about mistakes and lessons learned. It's not the mother-son relationship I dreamed of when he was little, but it's an honest relationship between 2 adults learning how to respect each other. Jessica and I have never spoken again. According to Michael, their marriage couldn't withstand the financial pressure once my money was gone. She moved back in with her parents, and he rented a small apartment he can afford on his own. Maybe the princess discovered real life is nothing like the fairy tales funded by a naive mother-in-law's wallet. I don't feel angry at her. In truth, I feel pity for a woman who never learned how to build a relationship on anything other than material gain, who never learned what real love is. 2 years later, I can say with certainty I am a completely different woman. Not just because I changed homes and habits, but because I changed from the inside. I learned to value myself, to say no, I learned that I deserve to be treated with dignity. My finances are now stable and secure. I have a pension that lets me live comfortably, investments that grow steadily each month, and a detailed will to ensure my assets go to what truly matters to me when I'm gone. I founded a fund to support older women who are victims of family abuse. It's something that fills me with pride and purpose. Thanks to the organization, attorney Henry Allen helped me establish. We've already helped dozens of women break free from situations like the one I lived through. My health is excellent. I walk every day, eat well, and sleep peacefully. The constant stress of manipulation and emotional blackmail had worn down my body in ways I didn't even realize. Now, set free, I feel more energetic and stronger than I have in years. I have plans for the future. I want to travel more, explore other countries, maybe even learn a new language. I want to keep painting, maybe even hold a watercolor exhibit of my own. I want to keep helping other women find their strength and independence. Sometimes I ask myself if I hadn't discovered the secret wedding back then, if I hadn't had the courage to stop paying, what would my life look like? I'd probably still be supporting Michael and Jessica, believing I was a good mother without realizing I was just a wallet with feelings. The humiliation of that day, the cruel line, "only for special people," turned out to be a gift. It was the shock that woke me up, forced me to stop accepting scraps of affection in exchange for money, and made me understand that real love can't be bought or sold. Today, when I look in the mirror, I see a woman who respects herself. I see someone who learned it's better to be alone with dignity than accompanied without respect. I see a survivor who became a warrior, who turned pain into wisdom, betrayal into liberation. The question people most often ask when I tell my story is, was it worth losing your son over money? My answer is always the same. I didn't lose my son because of money. I discovered I never had the son I thought I did. What I reclaimed is worth more than any relationship built on exploitation: my self-worth, my independence, and my peace of mind. I reclaimed Alice, the woman who once lost herself trying to buy a love that never existed. If you're going through something similar, I want you to know you deserve more. You deserve respect, appreciation, and relationships based on genuine love, not material interest. It's never too late to say no. It's never too late to reclaim your dignity. It's never too late to discover your strength and use it to build the life you truly deserve. My name is Alice Johnson. I'm 67 years old. And today, I can proudly say I am a free, independent, and happy woman. And if I can do it, you can too. Life after 60 can be the most beautiful chapter of your story if you're brave enough to write it yourself. If this story touched your heart, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and comment below, "in my place." What would you do because your message could brighten someone's day?